Welcome to San Diego Integral, September 14th, 2024. Our topic today, Building Micro Practices for Self-Mastery, presented by Michael McElhenie.
Welcome everyone to San Diego Integral. I'm Tom Habib, and we have an exciting presentation today. I get to introduce the speaker today. This is Michael McElhenie. Michael has over 35 years experience as a facilitator, a coach, and an advisor to global leaders. He's an expert in guiding transformational change. He runs the global consultancy Metatropia and founded Exalt Athletes in 2020, which is transforming the culture of youth sports. Something needs to be done, especially in Orange County. With a foundation in behavioral neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and crucial communication, Michael is often called upon to help leaders navigate the complex dynamics of executive teams and board relationships. He's a licensed psychologist and graduate of Being First Foresight and the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland's Organizational Systems and Developmental Programs. Michael received his doctorate in organizational, clinical, and experimental psychology and has a bachelor's of science in neuroscience and psychology. Michael is a board member of serving Integral Leadership in Action, who is essential to building the ICON conference, along with many members of San Diego Integral. So, and I will put in the chat, Integral Leadership in Action will be doing a workshop on April 3rd to April 5th in Boulder. And it's called the Embodied Integral Workshop. And I'll put a link in the chat in a few minutes for it. So welcome aboard, Michael, and away we go.
Thank you, Tom. Everybody hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Great to be here with all of you. I see a lot of old friends, and I'm delighted. This is something new for me to bring this line of practice into the integral community. The integral community, sometimes we are self-critical in that we have such a rich intellectual foundation to draw from. And there's so much beautiful cognitive models, maps, et cetera, to integrate, that our self-criticism, and sometimes we get it from the outside too, is that we're a little bit like disembodied heads, so much intellect, and yet this session today, this opportunity today, is going to go to the complete other end of the continuum. This is not about intellect at all. This is about your relationship to your body. It's about your relationship to your body in the course of its everyday experience. So this is a can of sparkling water. I think I'm addicted, by the way. I drink these things all the time. Somebody please figure out if there's a inpatient facility I should go to get over my addiction to sparkling water. But if I asked you to hold this can, maybe the question you would ask is, well, how much is in it? How much does it weigh? That's not a bad question to ask. If I'm asking you to hold this, especially for an extensive period of time. But that's not the most important question. The most important question is, how long do you want me to hold that? Because even if this thing weighed 6 ounces, it would still get very tiring to hold it. I'm speaking in metaphor, obviously. And the metaphor that I like to reveal is that How often do you go through a day holding the stressors of the day, the stressors of moments that occur in the day, the frustrations, the anger, the irritations? How often do you hold those for the full extent of the day until you can get home and unwind? Today, we are addressing that particular opportunity, to go right at that opportunity. I've been experimenting with micro practices for nearly 3.5 decades. And I had no idea these things were called micro practices. I didn't learn they were called micro practices until right at the start of COVID, where I was contacted by a colleague of mine, Carrie Chernus, who sits at Rutgers University, who said, "Hey, Michael, we're going to do some work in some hospitals because of COVID, and people are experiencing a great deal of stress. And I know you've worked with doctors and nurses before. Michael, will you join us as our team? Because we want to experiment with micro practices." And I said, "What's that?" And he told me what they were. And I said, "Oh, you mean rituals?" He goes, "That's a good name for them. Where did you learn that?" And I said, "Well, I've been doing rituals with my little side hustle and working with professional athletes for 3.5 decades. He goes, "Oh, well, the way you're describing rituals and the way we describe micro practices suggests that they're exactly the same thing." I said, "Great. This is awesome. I don't have this steep learning curve to get on board with you during this project, working with a hospital that we started working with first in Houston." And so I learned that for 3.5 decades, I have been playing with micro practices without knowing exactly what they were called. So back to the metaphor. Micro practices are small, thus the word micro. They're not very significant intellectually. They're very, very simple. And I guarantee that as we explore these micro practices, you're going to say to yourself, "I know these things," because you do know these things. However, micro practices is unique because it has us put together very familiar things in unique ways that are very personal to us, to each one of you. You're going to create your own unique micro practices, hopefully today. And you're going to continue to experiment with these micro practices, moving various techniques in and out of them as you go, because that is the way micro practices can fully land for you and help you in the way that they can. So let go of any understanding of these things as complex or intellectual or even new. Maybe the word, like it was to me, is new to you, micro practices, but the concepts underneath micro practices are deeply familiar to you, which will allow you to experiment with these micro practices quicker and more efficiently. And we do mean experiment with it, like you're the research subject and you're playing around with these ideas as you go about every single day of your life. And here's what I'll guarantee. If you do experiment with micro practices, you will begin to feel better. You will have less stress that you're carrying around. You will actually begin to feel as if your life is under control. How do I know that? I know that because that's the experience people have with experimenting with these micro practices. During COVID, when we were bringing micro practices into the hallways of hospitals, all masked up, carrying these micro practices, walking down the halls with doctors and nurses and paraprofessionals, teaching them these practices in between the times they were seeing patients, we know that they impacted these individuals' lives during one of the most horrific periods of time in our history. That's what I think will happen today. Thus, by the way, is the reason I renamed today's presentation to not be a presentation, but a discovery. And so everybody can see the slides now, fully up and running. Fantastic. So I don't want to belabor any more introduction about me, but I do want to point out some things that are not generally in any of my bios. You can read between the lines on my LinkedIn page and see it. But I'm one of these weird psychologists where I have done, and I have such profound curiosity about so many domains of psychology that I'm unique in that I transport practices from one domain of psychology to the other. For the most part, I am an organizational leadership expert. I bring emotional intelligence because of my neuroscience background and relationship to people like Dan Goldman and Annie McKee and Francis Johnson and Carrie Chernus, who I already mentioned. But I also, because I was an athlete, a good athlete, I have always provided services to professional athletes and coaches. Again, going back 3.5 decades. And because of that experience, I was able to bring these practices back and forth from leadership to the sports arenas to from sports arenas into leadership. And so in many respects, I've been an integral psychologist by practice because I've integrated so many different domains of psychology to be able to do the work that I wanted to do, to have the impact I wanted to have. So this understanding of micro practices really started in the realm of sports psychology. It started in that realm because when you're a pitcher standing on a mound or a goaltender in a hockey goal, you don't have hours to engage in practice after a significant bad event, frustrating event occurs in a game. You have seconds. Micro practices originated from this very unique situation. And then when I started transporting these practices into the leadership realm and helping people who are on an analyst call or giving a board presentation or asked a difficult question during an executive team meeting and have to get their heads back in the game, it was brought from the world of sports into that context for the same situation, for the same reasons, is that a person didn't have minutes to be able to get their mind back into the moment. They only had seconds. So these micro practices were designed to be able to deal with the situations that occur in professional sports and then moving down into college. And now I get the pure joy of being able to work with young athletes. It's keeping me young, by the way. It's having me work out a lot more than I used to because I want to show up to these young athletes so that I can be seen by them as being able to be effective guidance, a guide to them as they explore these mental game practices, as they're called in the world of sports. But they are essentially the very same thing. So here's where I want to start us out today. We're going to engage in our very first breakout session. And these breakout sessions will be in groups of 3. And these groups of 3 will maintain as much as possible consistent across the entirety of our time together. And in this first breakout, you're asked to talk to your colleagues, just a minute or 2 per person, talk about how your current practices serve you and how you're thinking about potentially improving your practices. Whenever you see, by the way, this little red box that has the "we're doing an activity" on the side, and you happen to kind of check out for a moment and then come back into the meeting, if you see that little yellow box, that little yellow text there saying "we're doing an activity," that tells you what we're doing. And if you want to move into a breakout after coming back to us, you know that that's what we're doing. So this guidance is always provided on the slide. So Eloy, let's go ahead and move into our first breakout so we can talk about these questions here.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Welcome back, everybody. So just a little narration from me, just as to how we're going to treat the breakouts. Let's leave the breakouts to the breakouts, meaning you don't have to report out anything that happened in the breakouts. You're, again, going to be paired up with a same person, unless, new people join us and other people go away. It may cause us to mix up a little bit, but the intent is to keep you with a particular group. Oh, hi, Larry. I see you, Larry. Glad to see your face, Larry. So I want to move us forward, and let me share screen again so get us back to that. And I want to move into just deepening our understanding. You got a very brief overview of micro practices, but now we're going to dive into it with both feet. So you have this understanding of micro practices, again, with the intention that you begin to, in our workshop today, that you begin to build some of your own so you can experiment with these micro practices. I'm not assuming that everybody is going to do that, but I want to create that opportunity for everybody to do it so that by the end of this process, you will have what you need to be able to do that. However, here's the other thing I want to say about what we're going to do today. At the tail end of our process, we are going to send you a quick start guide so that you have a PDF that describes micro practices in a bit more detail. So do know that that's coming at the tail end of our process. So micro practices, let's talk about the big picture here. Our objective is for you to be able to experiment with them. But what are micro practices? Micro practices are very short intentional activities that you engage in to help you regulate your emotions, your thoughts, to help you maintain focus or whatever other intention you want to bring to the moment. That's the key right there. One of the things that Krish Mahalye discovered while he was doing research, even prior to him coming out with his book Flow, is that we as adult humans aren't as intentional as we could or should be. And so this idea of a micro practice is also inviting you to be intentional about how you move from one space to the next, how you move from one moment to the next. And where you're likely going to want to start with this is that if the next thing you're about to move into is really important to you, then it is a good time prior to that moment to engage in some intentional activities so that you increase the likelihood that you show up in that moment in the way that you want to show up. And here's what we know in relationship to Mahalye's research and others, is that when we do set an intention about how we want to show up, it increases substantially our likelihood of showing up in that situation in the way that we want to. And yeah, that might be a blinding flash of the obvious for folks here, but we often still do not do it. And so micro practices are in part a practice designed to help you set an intention and increase the likelihood that you deliver on the intentions that you set. They are highly personalized. I don't like the word self-mastery, but it does help us feel as if we have a degree of self-efficacy. We are managing our world in the way that we want to manage our world, both internal world and external world. Mental clarity, emotional self-awareness, resilience are all of the things that people have reported with using micro practices. And by the way, in that PDF that we are going to send you, there are some research links there for you to see the research that we conducted prior to COVID, during COVID, so you see what kind of impact we've had on the research populations that we've been working with. These micro practices, by the way, just to be specific about the micro element of it, they only last for a few minutes, on average, somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes, meaning that they're really easy to integrate into people's lives. In fact, this device, this phone device that I sometimes disparage because it's always drawing my attention to it, right? Boy, am I acting like a victim in relationship to this device. But on the other side of me victimizing myself to the device, I recognize that it is a very useful tool in that I build in these little 2 to 3 minute practices into my schedule. Particularly if I look at my calendar and I say, there's a really important moment happening at 4:30. And so right there at 4:25, I'm going to begin a micro practice and set an intention and do the practice that's aligned with that intention. So I show up in that very important moment in the way that I want to show up. So you can build these micro practices into your calendar. And I recommend that as a practice. But these are very much suited to you. Your practices will not look like anybody else's practices. And again, as we go through this, you'll see that. So this is the big picture around micro practices. And I just want to pause here for a moment and ask anybody if they have any questions about this big picture aspect of micro practices before we move into a little bit more of a micro understanding of it. Everybody good? All right, let's continue to move forward. So my version of micro practices that I'm exposing you to is one of many versions, and yet they're more similar than they are different. When I look at, for example, my colleague Carrie Chernus's version of micro practices, they include a lot of the same elements. And they certainly include those very micro periods of time, the 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 minutes max, right? So what you're going to get is certainly my understanding of micro practices, but again, there's more similarity across the practitioners and the popularizers of this particular topic than there are differences. So there are, in my version of micro practices, there are 3 main building blocks. I call these micro techniques. Micro techniques are the building blocks of micro practices. And there are 3 categories of micro techniques that we'll talk about today. Breath work, which is why that lung image is a little bigger than the other 2. Breath work is oftentimes called the anchor micro technique, that most micro practices have built into them some form of breath work. And the reason why it's such an important anchor technique is that your breath work technique very much must align with your intention. And I'll get into that more here in a moment. Next, in terms of micro technique category, is the idea of visualization and positive imagery, allowing your ability to use your imagination to create images in your head, visualize sequences. They could be single images, they could be a movie playing in your head, but visualization and positive imagery is a collection of micro techniques that we can bring to micro practices. And finally, the last one is positive thinking, which again, there's nothing revolutionary about any of these micro techniques or these categories. They're well known to a lot of people. And we know that positive thinking, things like, thought flipping, right? And just intentionally moving into positive thoughts, or checking your negative thoughts at the door and begin to walk into a different room where only positive thoughts are allowed. All of those positive thinking micro techniques can be brought to micro practices. And so what I want to do next is I want to begin to unpack these domains of micro techniques and just give you some examples of a few of them in each one of these categories. And what I'd like you to do as well is, just for the purpose of our time today, I want you to take notes on which of the micro techniques really seem to resonate with you more, or they're micro techniques you already practice, you already engage in them. Because very likely, if you already engage in those micro techniques, then very likely they're going to continue to be useful to you when you put them together into a micro practice. So again, take notes, and I'm only going to give you a sample of these micro techniques per category, but again, just capture the ones that you resonate with, so that we can at least use our time today so that you get to experiment with building a micro practice, and possibly even after we're done, experiment with doing a micro practice. So here's where we're going. First thing, breath work. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of different breath work techniques out there. I encourage people to go on YouTube and search breath work practices. I don't know any bad breath work practices, but some of my favorites are listed here. Rhythmic breathing, simply breathing according to a rhythm. I have this wonderful song that I love. It's by Golden Earring. It was a one-hit wonder song, right? Called Radar Love. And I hear that beat of Radar Love. Dun, 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 dun. I have a breathwork practice that follows the rhythm of the song Radar Love. Balloon breathing, where you treat your diaphragm and your lungs as a balloon and you fully expand your diaphragm and you really allow your diaphragm to expand maximally. It's also called expansion breathing, by the way. In some circles, they call it that. Counted breathing, where you do count to 3 on the exhale, count to 3 on your inhale, and the pauses in between get a number as well. So counted breathing is a very popular technique. And one of my favorites is bunny or fire breathing. And a lot of you have already told me that you are yoga practitioners, and fire breathing is something that's often done in many yoga practices, especially in areas like Navikriya and others, where you're breathing very rapidly in and out of your nose. By the way, blow your nose before doing fire breathing or bunny breathing, because you'll get snot everywhere if you're doing it right. So those are some 4 different practices that you could be done within a breathwork context. But let me just do a little bit of micro focus on these practices just for a moment. If you're doing slow, diaphragmatic, rhythmic breathing, for example, that's going to slow you down. That's going to reduce the energy coursing through your body. Excuse me. So if your intention is to come into a situation from a place of great calm, a rhythmic, slow, diaphragmatic breathing technique is going to serve you really well. So you'd want to build that into a micro practice that carries the intention that you bring yourself in a calm state into that next moment. Excuse me. However, if you want to bring high energy, maybe even a frantic energy into the next situation, rhythmic breathing is not going to do it for you. It's probably going to be that bunny breathing or fire breathing that's going to bring that energy into the moment. So that's just one little pause to see how the choice of breathwork technique needs to align with intention to allow that micro practice to truly serve you in that next moment. So again, we just focused here on breath work. We just explored a few different micro techniques, but my encouragement is that when you build a micro practice, make sure you're including a breath work technique in it. It is an anchor practice, and you choose the breath work technique that you love, are familiar with, have a degree of resonance to, and you make sure that the intent of that breathwork practice aligns with the intention of your micro practice, which aligns with your intention about how you want to show up in whatever moment you're moving into. So again, just want to pause here, just want to check in for any thoughts or questions as we continue to explore these micro techniques. Hearing none, let's move forward. So the next domain, Ishan, you have a question potentially, but you do certainly have your hand raised, so I want to pause for you.
I want to see the slide which showed the description about the breathwork practices below before. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Oh,
So
right here. This one?
Yeah, this one.
Okay, very much.
And I got that. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And I do, folks, encourage people to capture these slides if you want, and these will be turned into a PDF and sent to you as well. So moving on to visualization and positive imagery. Again, there are hundreds of practices that could be included in this domain of micro techniques. I am just showing you a few. And I'm not going to go and belabor these, but What I will tell you is that they all have different intentions. Obviously, a confidence booster imagery, right? Maybe seeing yourself on top of the podium at the Olympics, if that's something that gives you a degree of confidence. Maybe it's the power pose that Brene Brown talks about. Regardless, is that you want to align a visualization or an imagery practice that is going to serve you in that moment. If you want to feel calmer, for example, then maybe what you're wanting to do in terms of imagery is imagine yourself on a very, very nice white sandy beach and you're hearing the waves crash on the beach. Maybe that's it for you. That's a serenity visualization example. So regardless, we want to ensure that these visualizations or these images that we're choosing to include in our micro practices truly serve our intentions for the moment that we're moving into. Again, this is a preparatory practice. That's what micro practices are. And so that's the wonderful thing about visualization and positive imagery. The world is your oyster. There is so much you can do in this domain. Whether it's you want to, achieve high, to be a high achiever in the moment that you're moving into, maybe to have supreme levels of confidence. Maybe it's you want to have a degree of articulated clarity. Whatever it is, you can bring a visualization, you can bring imagery to be able to support that intention. Simple idea, but powerful impact. And finally, positive thinking. Again, we know of many, many practices in the positive thinking realm, all the way from simple affirmations. And I bet if I asked every single person in this meeting today, if you have some affirmation statements that continually occur for you, we'd probably get many, many examples. The thought flipping technique of moving from a negative thought to a positive thought is often taught in cognitive behavioral psychology, of course, but it's been out there for a number of years as well. And one of my favorite ones, and when I'm working with young athletes, they love the gratitude slam, where they're just appreciating themselves and saying all sorts of versions of thank you for aspects of themselves, thank you for the things that they use to support them, thank you for their parents and their opportunities, thank you for the people in your life, thank you for the opportunity to do meaningful work, whatever it might be. This ability just to drop in and just focus heavily on gratitude, the things you're grateful for, is a wonderful micro technique to bring into micro practices. Okay. So again, I didn't want to go deeply into these micro techniques because it's wide open territory for a lot of folks. So I just want to allow you a moment to share some of your favorite micro techniques, because obviously I did not cover the full ground of possibilities here. So we're going to drop into another breakout. And in this breakout, that's our opportunity, is to share any micro techniques that we have as our favorites, whether you use them in a 2 to 3 minute period or whether you use them in a 10 to 30 minute period, it really doesn't matter. But these are things that we can shape into micro techniques so that they can be brought into micro practices. So Eloy, we're ready to move into that next breakout, please.
We have a quick question from Madeline.
Madeline, go for it.
I was wondering if you could please give examples of the 3 positive thinking techniques: the affirmations, the thought flip, and the gratitude slam.
My favorite affirmation, it was taught to me by my when I was going off to sell books when I was an undergraduate. It was my roommate Dwight. He used to wake up in the morning, go immediately to the mirror, and he would say to himself, "Dwight, you beautiful thing, don't you ever die." I used to laugh every morning. It did wonders for me, and I'm sure it did wonders for Dwight as well. Right? The thought flipping technique that I really love is that whenever I have a thought that comes up into my mind, for example, if I ever get cut off in traffic, I immediately say the words, "They're probably going to the hospital." Think about what that does. Rather than curse or use those gestures that we often use when we're cut off in traffic, I immediately transform the thought into something that brings forth empathy. That's my favorite thought flipping technique. Alrighty, so let's go back to our breakout structure. And again, one last request for any questions before we do so. Alrighty, Eloy, let's do it.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
Well, folks, welcome back. I hope that that opportunity to share micro techniques served you well. Hopefully you learned a few more practices. I certainly did. I learned from Anna breathing like an elephant, and that was a beautiful, beautiful piece of imagery, as well as using the breathwork techniques. And I really love this compassion for those who just did a major karmic dump, right? They've cost themselves karmically in major ways, in bringing compassion for folks in that moment. Wow, that's a really powerful practice. So hopefully you had a sample of some really powerful practices as well. What I'd like to move into now is to do some work around micro practices, so micro practice building. So let me go back to share screen for a moment to move us into this territory. So give you a sense of this. So when you are creating a micro practice, you're combining those micro techniques into an intentional practice, a very brief intentional practice. And again, I can't cover the full ground of possibilities here, so I'm only going to exemplify. But these are some micro practices that have been built out of micro techniques that are combined intentionally in order to accomplish a particular purpose. And these techniques that you see listed here are actual techniques that come from my clients. So there's one practice called the critical moment energizer, where it uses bunny breathing, which again has this increased energetic effect, with confidence boost imagery and affirmations to be able to get a person energetically ready and confident to be able to enter an important moment like a public talk or a very challenging conversation. Focusing ritual incorporates counted breaths, which are a focusing breathwork technique that increase the likelihood that you increase your ability to focus. It's activating those pathways. And then combined with winning moment visualization, imagining yourself doing something really wonderful and getting the accolades with it. And then thought flipping techniques to make sure that you're keeping yourselves in that positive frame of mind. Goal achievement plan, that's one where it takes expansive breathing, right? Increases your lung capacity, empty out your lungs as much as possible, timing it with a gratitude slam, positive imagery, and even some affirmations. Now, if you're starting to think, how do we combine all of these things in a 2 to 3 minute practice? That's where the practice comes. That you're probably not going to combine these smoothly, elegantly at the start. But as you continue to experiment with micro practices, you're going to find that you can do many of these things simultaneously. Some of my clients say, hey, everybody tells me not to multitask as much, but this is really good multitasking. And I'm absolutely 100% behind that. If you're going to do any kind of multitasking, this is the kind of multitasking you want to do, because ultimately in a very short period of time, it greatly benefits you. And then the last one you see listed here is a relaxation and recovery. Again, slow, rhythmic, deep diaphragmatic breaths, maybe some confidence imagery, and maybe just some simple mindfulness, being aware of what's occurring in your body, maybe occurring in a particular area. Regardless, as you're just bringing a degree of mindfulness, meaning you're taking your focus from out here to something very, very specific and narrow. Okay, and what we know what that does for us neurologically. So that's the intention of micro practices. You're taking these micro techniques, you're putting them together into a single micro practice, and you're aligning those techniques with an intention. So the intentions you have for the moment invite you to choose micro techniques that are going to best support that intention. And even though you're hearing me say that, say, for example, bunny breathing has a very different impact on energy than, say, slow rhythmic breath, ultimately, you are going to have to experiment with these micro techniques included in your micro practices to be able to realize the results you want to realize. Okay? I cannot dictate that to you. I cannot dictate what these micro techniques are going to do for you. I can't dictate for you how they're going to align with your intentions. That is a discovery. It is not something that one person can tell another, because these show up in our neurological uniqueness that we all have. And so the experimentation is key when working with these micro practices. So here's what I want to do. I want to pause here for a moment. And I want to give you just a couple minutes to think through a micro practice that you would have for a particular intention. So here's the way that I invite you to think about it. Let me move to the next slide, and it'll give you a specific way of thinking about it. So here's the prompt. To create a micro practice in this moment, and again, we're just doing this for this moment in the spirit of this workshop, think about a time of day or a situation when you'd benefit from a brief practice. It could be a particular meeting that you have regularly. It could be a particular situation that occurs for you on a regular basis. Or it could be a rarity moment, an unusual moment, a moment that you know that if you did a bit of practice before it, you would actually enjoy or be more successful, or whatever else you'd like to experience during that moment or situation. But pick one in this moment right now, and begin to craft on paper or in your head a micro practice for that moment. So again, I'm asking you to be specific about a moment, create that moment, and then create a micro practice for that moment. And we're just going to take a couple minutes just to pause right here. We're not going into breakout rooms. We'll do that here in a moment, but just allowing you to craft a micro practice so that you can share it in the next breakout. So just going silent here for just a couple minutes. Just another 10 seconds or so. And then Eloy, as soon as we're done with this particular bit of preparation, again, regardless of whether you fully fleshed it out or not, doesn't matter.
Do you want to take Ishan's question first?
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely do that. Ishan, go ahead with your question.
Yep. My question is regarding the technical clarification between the positive thinking and positive imagery. So what is the distinction between both of them?
Yeah, so positive thinking is directly working on your internal dialogue. So it's wrapped up around words. Imagery is just images. You're seeing pictures. Again, whether it's a single image or whether it's kind of a running movie that you're seeing in your head. So that's the distinction. Positive thinking, usually around words, imagery, all around images.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, we've had a few people have to leave, so if you're in a room with one or two, you'll be moved around shortly. So hang tight, and we'll take care of you.
Thank you.
Breakout sessions are not recorded.
So as I said, you want to discover these micro practices. You want to play with, experiment with, use whatever term is going to best serve you to just play. You know, I love play. I think that's one of the things that we're trying to return to youth athletics, by the way, in that particular domain of my life. But allow yourself to play, allow yourself to experiment with these elements. I love the after action review, even though I learned it, quote, in a military context. You know, this whole what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do better is a great, very simple system for evaluating how well your day of micro practices have gone. when you get the PDF document, you'll see that there are some recommendations about how you can build these things into your calendar. Feel free to surrender to that guidance if it resonates with you. Don't surrender to that guidance if it doesn't resonate with you. But absolutely begin to consider an opportunity to experiment with these things. We were going to do another breakout, but we're not going to do that right now. But I'd love to hear just your thoughts, reactions to this exploration of micro practices. Just come off mute, raise your hand, come off mute, and tell me what has been your experience with these micro practices. At least in my breakout group, people have discovered some wonderful new things, but I'd love to hear others. So just raise your hand, come off mute. Just tell us what you've done and discovered.
I'll go ahead.
Thanks,
And
Christine.
yeah, I was going to say, I think for me, the biggest benefit is just the mindfulness, really being intentional about things and not just kind of blithering through stuff, and being more gentle with myself. Perhaps that's the other advantage, is be a little bit kinder to myself as I do these. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Christine. Ishan?
Yes, so I have thought of one micro practice, and it was related to when I go into the workflow states and productivity sessions that I have. So it is related to like these bunny breaths and this breath of fire that could pump me up with energy, and paired with a visualization technique that would be like flipping the scenario instead of thought flip. That would be like I would be visualizing all the things possibly that could go wrong, like me wasting time on distracting stuff, or like something shows up and everything, and then visualizing instead that I have spent all my time in a focused, deep work, high quality work, and had the outcome that I planned to do in front of me.
Yeah.
And yep, it is what I have thought.
Fantastic. Thank you. Greatly appreciate that. Others? Karen, can I invite you to share yours, if you will, with the group?
Okay, under Michael McElhenie's instruction, I have constructed a micro practice that I'm hoping will help me restart my long-term morning meditation practice, which I had done for 35 years and has completely disintegrated since COVID started. And I've been wanting to restart it. And so my morning practice, I'm starting with a standing breathing exercise, because I get up, I did keep getting up at 4:30 in the morning, but then I kind of get lured by clickbait on my smartphone. So part of it is setting up with a video of my guru giving a talk on my smartphone the night before and having a cup of coffee ready for me. So I need a micro practice for the night before. But then when the alarm goes off at 4:30, I stand up and do a breathing thing that I evolved that is kind of beaming energy up from the core of the galaxy through my body down to the center of the earth. And that was the breathing. I kind of adapted that into Michael's breathing practice side. And that has a whole kind of bringing the divine into the manifest, and then the manifest cycling back to the divine and back and forth. And that takes about 5 minutes. Actually, for those of you who saw, that was part of my presentation here at San Diego Integral about 1.5 years ago, actually. Fun with Eros and Agape, or the way up is the way down. So I have that ready made. I pulled that out of the can for this. So that was the breathing part. And then for the positive thinking, I have a certain prayer that's about 3 sentences where my small self surrenders to my eternal self, the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it. So that's the positive thinking. And then I'm going to have to experiment with this to see what works. But I think for part 3, I'm going to cheat a little bit on Michael's paradigm here. I'll sit and drink my coffee and listen to the video of my guru or somebody like Shinzen Young or Eckhart Tolle. Do that for about 20 minutes while I drink my coffee, and then I'll be ready to sit and really go in. Start with a half an hour. I'm not going to try for the whole hour, 2 hours, but just get started. And so if I can kind of, with setup the night before, so that I can bypass some of the speed bumps. This is just, I've been really yearning to get that meditation practice restarted, because my days, I'm just in a much better frame of mind on days when I start with a real meditation than not. And this is like just the perfect synchronicity for me to have Michael appear here today and help us pull this together. So thanks. So that's my gratitude slam. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I love it. I love it. And by the way, just for clarity, consuming of beverages can be part of a micro practice. And just to say this out loud, if you look at a hockey goaltender after they've been scored on in the game of hockey, the goaltender will turn around immediately and grab their water bottle and take a sip. And that is the beginning of their micro practice.
Ah.
And by the way, they don't always have water in that bottle. It's usually all sorts of different things. In fact, I'm working with a goalie right now who has green tea in their water bottle. So let me just open it up just to anybody who has any thoughts or comments before we close.
I am surprised that I do a lot of small micro practices already, because it doesn't take a lot of time.
Mhm.
So I'm aware that is how I approach things. Like one of the ones I've been doing this week, since I took the week off, is sitting at my workbench in the garage and implementing what a guy I grew up with, his father, he called it puttering. Puttering. I love it. You take a drink of coffee, listen to the radio, work on something a little bit. And it's just getting away from that compulsive, got to get it done technique that I love puttering a little bit, because it alters the way I approach things. I have a choice rather than obsess and compulse on everything I do. Then it's easy to be mindful of, when do I need to compulse? When can I putter? Just enjoying the work, not pressing. So I like being mindful of these things, how we're approaching it. It's not life or death, or that constant idea of, when I get this done, I can relax. I'm never done.
Yeah.
My lists are never done. I think everyone here relates to that.
I love it, Tom. Thanks for naming a practice that probably most of us have already engaged in. I love it. I'm going to start focusing on my puttering practice. Vic, dear friend.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for this wonderful workshop and micro practices, the newest buzzword of incredible techniques and to expand awareness. I'm all in.
Cool.
I play playful skeptic, but at the same time, I honor what you're doing, and a gratitude slam for me recently, and it kind of honors your context of this happened during COVID and your relationship with the doc. I forget the guy's name,
Harry Chernus.
Chernus. But I have found myself just wanting to just to be grateful to our healthcare providers during COVID, the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, the everything that had the courage.
Yeah. What brought tears to my eyes so often, Vic, is how often a nurse or a doctor would say, "Thank you for loving us." Oh my God. Every time that would get me, because it was just pure love.
Yeah.
Show up in that context, them showing up in that context with all the uncertainty. If you remember March, April, May, June of 2020, holy crap, it was so difficult for so many people. And for a lot of them, they just said, these practices are just what we need. Thank you for bringing them to us. And it did. It felt like an act of love, and stuff felt like it was received with love as well. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Go well, experiment, have fun, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you, Michael. So we're coming to the end. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Michael, where can people get a hold of you if they want to follow up on something, or could you put
Yeah.
something in the chat?
So yeah, absolutely. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and the PDF that Eloy's going to send to everyone, that has my contact information as well. I just put my email address. That's my consulting email address, but I'll also put, just so you can look up the website, the sports website, because my sports email address is the sports website, because I do find a lot of people and teams that I work with through my personal relationships. And so I'm happy to serve in whatever capacity, in whatever context you feel like I can provide the most value. So make that decision.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
So we're coming to the more informal meeting, where we can just discuss openly anything that's on your mind and what's going on, what might have got tweaked in you. Sometimes these meetings get really fun at the end of it, although I only have about 15 minutes. So remember to check online. Next month, we'll be meeting on October 12th. It's always the second Saturday each month. And if you can make a donation when you go, all the better. So with that said, anyone want to start off the discussion? You don't have to raise your hand, just unmute and jump in.
Thank you, Michael, very much. I'm going to take my lead now.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Keith.
Take care, Keith.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, this is Vic in Dallas.
Hey,
Thank,
Vic.
thank you for this. How long have you been doing SD integral? Many years, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been in this quite a few years.
This group's been around over 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow. It's such a blessing because even in Dallas, the face-to-face integral community has really dried up. That's where I met Michael McElhenie 25 years ago. And you really do a service to us as a worldwide integral community. So thank you for that, Tom. Deeply appreciative.
Happy to do it.
Maybe I'll just say, Michael, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I think not only does it offer practices that are supportive, but I found that just in kind of thinking through, what's the issue, what's the intention, really help clarify, needs that might otherwise not have really paid attention to. So there's almost a practice in the building of a practice that helps us become more aware. And I think the other thing that I really liked was the simplicity of it and the brevity. It just makes it feel accessible and achievable, not some long drawn out exercise. So thank you.
You're welcome, Ian.
I'll
It's
jump in after.
interesting that when you do work with 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and these are high achieving kids very often. And we know that practices are going to support them to keep their mind focused in the game, for example. You got to keep it really simple. And yet the more simple I made it for young people, the more capable I was of being able to teach it to adults. And there is a lesson there for me, is that sometimes we as adults tend to overcomplicate things. And so in many respects, there was a very strong intent to keep it as simple as possible, not because people aren't capable, but the it's not about the learning is in the doing, not in the onboarding to the what to do. And so that really changed my mind about how to teach this stuff. And so thank you for noticing its simplicity.
I'm going to jump in real quick with, since Ian just spoke, Ian reminded me of the practice of emotional freedom technique. And the practice I'm going to put together is for my sleep routine, doing some breathing with the long exhale, doing focusing felt sense work to find what's active in me, and then using that in an EFT format. So although I'm feeling whatever it is, and then the other part of the EFT would be, and I surrender to sleep. And so it sounds like it'll be wonderful, but we'll see how it goes in practice.
That's wonderful. Ela, you mentioned the long exhale, and I want to point to that because early neurological evidence shows that extended exhale is really important. In fact, it aligns with a lot of the things that come out of the HeartMath organization. And it suggests that if you can do a pause, not an intentional forced pause, but a relaxed kind of surrender-like pause at the very end of the exhale, it really extends and deepens the benefit of that long exhale. So that's another wonderful thing to experiment with.
You know what I like what you said, Michael, is that the more simple it becomes, the easier it is to teach it to people. Rather than convoluting this thing and making it so hard, because on Icon 26, what we're challenging ourselves to do is to bring really people from adjacent communities on board. And we'll know they get it when they have this state experience. So a quick state experience of a micro practice, like I like the one you're doing in driving. Eckhart Tolle on the driving, I'm sure most of you have read that, said, can you set as an intention that I'm not going to react when I get cut off? And I remember the first time I did it, it took 9 trials before I wasn't saying under my breath, asshole. But I finally did it.
Mm-hmm.
I observed without criticism. Eckhart described it as. And I was like, wow, I did it.
Yeah.
So I like these little practices. I think they're great on-ramps that are much more distributable than a theory of everything.
Mm.
You could go with, I love you, asshole.
That's an interim step, Ela.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on this and back to what Ian said, starting to make it really accessible to and usable to 8-year-olds. That must have been incredibly useful for dealing with people, corporate executives too. Kind of same thing. I've had very little to do with the corporate world, a lot too much with academia and some with not-for-profit groups. But I've noticed when working with corporate types like our mutual friend Bet Bolhofer, who's had some very high positions in some Silicon Valley stuff. It's like the way they run meetings. It's you get to the point, you make as clearly and lucidly as possible. You make a decision, you move on. It's quick. So I was kind of connecting that with the 8-year-olds, kind of a similar thing. But you got to get stuff done in the big world of big business, and you don't waste unnecessary words or time. So these are just, but these kind of entry, how to make that first connection. It's like, yeah.
Well, Karen, those organizations are all the same, darling. Doesn't matter if it's university, corporate board, Democrat organization. I'm going to say they're all the same.
Oh, I don't know. My experience with academia and my minimal experience with corporate, it's a very different way of approaching things. Academics can just, that's more the Ken Wilber side, where you have these, page-long sentences with multiple nested subordinate clauses that you need a graduate degree to understand.
Yes.
That wouldn't work in the corporate world,
But-
in the
but
for-profit corporate
The
world.
super egos are there on all
Oh, yeah.
three of those bureaucracies,
The
darling.
super egos, totally. But yeah, I love this. It's just effective. It works. You plug it in and it works. And what a great way to make that first connection. Like Tom was talking about, to really make, you know, it's connected. You know, something's happened.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's not lost on us when we work with young people in the context of sports that we're essentially training them to deal with whatever circumstance, no matter where it occurs.
Yeah.
And I had a young man earlier in the week on where I was coaching him. He's a high-level basketball player. He's one of the top kids in the country in terms of being a center in basketball, which is a challenging position. And today I got an email from him where he said, I feel like you're preparing me to deal with my out of control parents as much as my out of control coach, because that was his initial presenting issue. He's never had a coach who was so achievement driven and unable to mitigate their intensity. And he feels like that intensity gets in him where everything is done with a sense of urgency, and that's causing him to make mistakes more than he should. So he feels like every single adult in his world that brings that kind of intensity, he can manage himself in the face of that. And he recognized his insight that he emailed me today about was that they're all out there. They're going to be there my entire life. And I am going to prepare myself for all of them by doing what I'm doing. I loved it. I thought like my heart just warmed.
Mike, I just had a snapshot of you revolutionary corporate coach, you in the boardroom, sharing these stories of children athletes with executives as a very, very revolutionary technique, my friend. I think it's absolutely genius.
Well, a lot of corporate executives are also supporting their kids and their grandkids. And they always wonder if they're, quote, doing it right. And so it's just another on-ramp. Just another one. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to go and I'm going to eat a little food before I begin to transition towards my late nights activities and eventually bed.
Thank you, Michael. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you,
This
everyone.
may be a good place to end. Does everybody agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Well,
we'll see you all next month, second Saturday every month. And watch online for who will be the presenter. And thank you, Michael and Eileen again. And we'll see you in Boulder for the conference.
Yeah.
Yes.
First weekend of April.
Looking forward to it.
Bye now.
Blessings.
Have a right.
Blessings.
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.